and welcome to this Boys Don't Cry Lit in Colour schools event. Lit in Colour is a campaign that supports UK schools to teach texts written by authors of colour. It's an honour to be hosting this conversation with Malorie Blackman, an award-winning prolific author of over 70 books for children and young adults, including Pig Heart Boy and Noughts and Crosses. Boys Don't Cry is available on 2 awarding bodies' GCSE specifications. I really hope that you enjoy this conversation today. Don't forget to submit your questions in. Malorie, it's an honour, it's an absolute pleasure to be joining you today. Thank you so much. Thank you. What inspired you to write Boys Don't Cry?
Well, Boys Don't Cry came about because I'd read an awful lot in the newspapers and things on the television about teenage mums and what a burden they were to society, and teenage mums bringing up children on their own and so forth. And I thought, well, it does take 2. How come we're not talking about the dads? And I thought, well, actually, I want to write a story where a dad finds himself in that position where he's quite literally left holding the baby and the mum does a runner because she says, I can't cope. And how it absolutely changes his life. And I just thought it's time we had this conversation from the boys' point of view. And I got very fed up with hearing about how it is sort of teenage mums are this and teenage mums are that. And I kind of thought, no, come on, it takes 2 and we need to hear the other point of view here.
Earlier in the novel, Dante finds it difficult to adjust to this role that you're speaking of being a father. But by chapter 28, he's no longer interested in choosing his friends over time with Emma. So tell us a bit about this shift in his kind of priorities and his responsibilities at that point.
I think he reacts the way any teenage boy or girl would do if with an unexpected pregnancy, and it's suddenly kind of all his plans to go to university, and he was going to be a journalist and he was going to set the world on fire, and then suddenly he's got a daughter and he didn't even know that his ex-girlfriend was pregnant, and suddenly he has this new life to look after. And he's presented with Emma when she's 11 months old, and suddenly it's like everything that he thought was going to happen has changed. And you know what they say about man plans and God laughs. And so it was kind of this thing of he had all these plans, but that's not going to happen anymore. But it's how he then has to adjust his life to accommodate Emma. And at first, his first thought is, well, I'm going to give her up for adoption, or she can be fostered or something. I'm too young for this. I can't cope with this. But it's about the story is about how these 3 men, his dad and his brother Adam and him, live in this house, and their mum died sort of earlier in the story, before the story starts, in fact. And it's how they've stopped communicating with each other. And it's thanks to Emma that they actually can express their thoughts and their fears about what they're going through, where their lives are going, and so on. Whereas before, they were all kind of just maybe orbiting around each other, but never really touching. So it was really, I wanted to show that progression and show that, of course, his first instinct is, I'm not doing this. I need to get rid of this child. And she means nothing to him because he didn't even know about her. But how, as he gets to know her and has to step up and be a proper father, how then he thinks, okay, my life has changed. It's different, but it's not necessarily worse. I mean, okay, he can't go to university then. It doesn't mean he'll never be able to go to university, but he has to step up and become a dad. And it's about his maturity. It's about him maturing as a person and having to step up and do that.
Yeah. You spoke about like them losing their mother, and it felt like grief really permeated the novel. Tell us a bit about your creative process in terms of including topics like grief in the text, and why was it important for these characters to go through that as well?
Well, I mean, again, it's about reflecting real life, and it's about if it can happen in real life, then it's a legitimate thing to write about. And I wanted this family of males to kind of as I said, then they've stopped communicating with each other. And it's only thanks to Emma that she begins to change the family dynamic. And I wanted to kind of have this whole thing of the dad. He's got his own secrets. He's trying to cope, but then Dante has a child, and then Adam's going through his own things as well. And one of my favourite scenes to write actually was Emma's teething, and when the child is teething, you do not get any sleep, you know? And it was sort of like, so I remember this from when I had my daughter, and it was like, oh God, you know, 1 hour here or 1 hour there. And you're just kind of trying to pacify them and so forth. And then, so she's teething and he's up and he's trying to rock her to sleep and he's exhausted. And the dad finally comes in and puts something on her gum and he puts her down in the cot. And Dante covers her over, and then he falls into bed and almost immediately asleep. And then his dad covers him over. And I wanted to, that was one of my favourite things to write, because it's this thing of no matter how old you are, you never stop being a parent. And in a way that, I am 62, and my mum still said when I'm going out, now make sure you take your coat and your scarf and all, and it's sort of like, Mum, you know how old I am? So it's kind of like expressing that thing of when you're a parent, it's kind of like it's hard to let that go. And I wanted to show the dad caring for Dante, but Dante not even noticing because he's too exhausted at that point. So
yeah, I was even going to say that Adam is presented as kind of taking to fatherhood much better, with more ease than...
You mean him being an uncle?
In that kind of paternal role, he takes to it with much more ease than Dante and their father. And I wanted to know if was there...
Well, but there's a thing about being an uncle, and I think he accepts the situation before they do.
Yes,
that's the thing, and he's not looking for ways out. And Tyler, the dad, his thing is, how could you be so stupid, and you've got a child and you're barely 18, and what you're going to do? I mean, you're going to have to step up and you're going to have to accept the fact you have a child. And Dante's thing is, oh my God, he just wants to drop it like a hot potato or a hot brick, he just wants to get rid of it. And but Adam's thing is, well, I've got a niece, and he absolutely embraces that. And so he is the first one to kind of accept the situation, but they all have their different stages to go through, and they all have their own stories to kind of deal with, and then you get a bit more about the dad Tyler and what happened with him and his wife and so on, and him realizing that actually he needs to be more present in his sons' lives. So again, it is exploring all of that and that whole male dynamic within the house, and how sort of Emma comes in and fundamentally shifts that.
Absolutely. Friendships for the young people are complex. In the novel, Adam and Dante's friends present varying attitudes and opinions to their lifestyle and to, for example, Dante's new fatherhood status and Adam's sexuality. One thing that struck me about those friendships is there was often a weight of disappointment. What did you intend young people to consider about friendships through these presentations?
Well, I think it's again about exploring friendship in a realistic way, in a truthful way, and saying sometimes friendships work and sometimes they don't. And sometimes things happen to fracture those friendships and shatter those friendships, and sometimes people step up. And I wanted to really explore that within this story. And it's about sort of Dante and his girlfriend Colette, and having a baby with someone else does to their relationship, and Dante with his friends, and suddenly he can't do the things that his friends are doing because he's got a baby to look after. And and it's sort of that those things about sort of partying and all the rest of it, not when you've got a child to look after, and so on. And so I wanted to be truthful in the telling of that. And then it's sort of and Adam having his own issues to deal with and so forth. And so, and learning who your friends are and who your friends aren't, and people wanting to be secret friends, or, and all these secrets that we don't want people to maybe know about, but what happens when they come out and so forth. So I wanted to explore all of that, but within a very sort of family setting, with a sort of, it's definitely a sort of family story. I saw it when I was writing it as the family, or this is the Bridgman family,
Yes.
and these are their lives, and I wanted to explore that.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt the same in terms of showing the friendships in that way gave space for the focus to be on the family kind of building their relationship. And you mentioned Colette, but before I go on to my question about her, I wanted to ask if you would read a section of the text.
Now this is Colette has learned that he's had a child with somebody else, and she's trying to persuade him to do the right thing. Dante, I like you, I really do, but I'm going to university. I'm going to have a career. I've got plans. I want to have a life. All this, Colette's gesture was open-handed, but she might as well have been pointing directly at Emma. All this is a bit overwhelming. For me too. Didn't anyone recognise that? But I got the message. This was not what Colette had signed up for. I understand, I said, and I did. My lousy timing had struck again. It's not fair that you should have to give up all of your dreams for something that wasn't planned or wanted, said Colette, anger lending an edge to her voice. It wasn't that simple. The something she was referring to was a someone I was currently pushing in a swing, a someone who had kept me up most of the night, but a someone who only had to laugh to make me smile. A real, living, breathing person, and that made all the difference. There must be something we can do, Colette shook her head. I don't see what, I replied. Emma doesn't come with an on-off switch that I can use for the next 3 years while I get my degree. I'm not giving up, said Colette. But she had to know there was nothing she or I could do. We spent another half an hour in the playground. I held Emma upright all the way down the baby slide, and we did that a few times. Next, I placed her on the baby seesaw, holding her while Colette pushed the other end up and down. And the whole time, Colette and I discussed uni, school, friends, politics, even the weather, but not Emma. And there was no more talk about the two of us. We headed home after that. I invited Colette inside, but she declined. I have a lot of stuff to sort out before I leave for university, she said. That should have been my cue to say, so do I. I said nothing. I'll phone you soon, okay? Said Colette. Okay. Don't worry, Dante, we'll sort something out, said Colette, before leaning in for a kiss. And as I kissed her, I couldn't help wondering if this would be the last time ever. She and I would soon occupy different worlds. I went indoors. The cool quiet of the hall was more than welcome. Unfastening the buggy straps, I took Emma straight upstairs, closing my bedroom door firmly behind me. I swabbed her cheek, I swabbed my own. I left the swabs balanced 2/3 on and 1/3 off my desk so that they could air dry. Emma sat on the carpet, exploring rather than reading one of her picture books. I sat on my bed and watched her as I waited for my old life to return. And that scene is where Dante is taking a swab because he wants to check the DNA. He's doing a DNA check to see if she's even his, and of course she is. So it is this whole thing of him trying to find ways out of being a father, and then realising that nope, he's got to step up.
So difficult when I hear that scene. To what extent? Well, to some extent, actually, Colette's character could be viewed as an antagonist just because she introduces Veronica, her sister, to Dante and to his situation as a social worker. What were you trying to expose about the social services and even his encounter with the GP in relation to kind of like the wider attitude towards teenage fathers?
Well, his sister, Colette's sister, Veronica, yes, she is a social worker. And yes, Colette tells her sister what's going on. And the sister arrives to check and make sure that Dante can cope and Dante is looking after the child. But as far as Veronica's concerned, her focus and her priority has to be the child, as it should be. And my sister's a probation officer, and it's a thankless task being a social worker or a probation officer, because it's like you have to do things which maybe other people won't appreciate, but you've always got to work for the best interests of in this case the child, Emma. And Dante is furious with Colette because, suddenly it's like everyone's in his business. But again, as far as Veronica's concerned, if you can't cope, we need to make sure that your child is not going to suffer, that Emma's not going to suffer. But when you're within that, it might not seem that way. It might seem that people are sticking their nose into your business. So he's not happy at all. But again, it's like at the doctor and they're saying things like, well, you have to bring in this and you have to bring in that. But he doesn't have any of that information because Mel had it all. He didn't even know he had a child. And then it's suddenly like people looking at him and looking at his daughter and thinking they know him. And it's like, oh, you teenage boys and you whatever and you're so worthless and so forth. And he's doing his best. And it's like, and the way they assume that, he's a deadbeat and he's no good and so forth. And again, when I was, before I wrote this, I did a lot of research. I was reading books about teenage dads, and I spoke to some people who had become dads when they were teenagers and how did they cope and how did the world view them, etc. And so I did make sure I did research to try and get it right and make sure it sounded authentically from a boy's point of view, from a teenage boy's point of view. But it was fascinating to me, the assumptions that are made, and the assumptions that we all make when we see kind of maybe young people with children and so forth, and you don't know their story, but rather than just leap in and condemn them, maybe try and talk to them to find out what their story is and what's going on, and maybe there's a way to help, etc., or give them the information they require. But with Dante, there's so many assumptions made about him that and in a way, I think he would have made those same assumptions if one of his friends had been in the same situation. So it's kind of an eye-opener to him. He deems it very unfair, which it is, but he would have maybe done the same thing.
And on that point around assumptions and stereotypes, I appreciate that apart from perhaps noughts and crosses, your characters being black is incidental to the plot, right? But when reading this novel, I felt like there was some importance around the Bridgmans being black specifically through the way you chose to present some of the issues that Dante and Adam experienced within their family and outside of it. Can you tell us more about the stereotypes you were unpacking about black boys through these experiences?
Well, I think what I was trying to do was, especially in Adam's case, and the whole thing of him being openly gay and proud of it, he's got nothing to hide. But in some quarters, it's seen as something that you should keep to yourself at the very least. And I remember I was doing a talk, actually, and I was talking about Boys Don't Cry. And there was this middle-aged guy in the audience, and I was talking about Adam being gay. And he was huffing and he was puffing and he was giving me the side eye and he gave lots of dirty looks and he was not happy. And then when I spoke more about Adam and how I wanted to broach the subject, he just stood up and walked out. And I thought, well, I wasn't writing it for you anyway, But that said, it was sort of like, wow. And it's just, some people feel like, why do you have to go there? And is this a suitable subject? And I think, why not? There are black gay people out there. There are gay people out there. And one of the nicest letters I've had was from a teenage white boy who said to me, he said, I know my colour doesn't make any difference, but he told me his colour, and he said, your book helped me to come out to my parents. And I thought, it's one of my favourites, so I sort of kept it in a folder, and I just thought, that's lovely, because if it empowers people and makes them feel like, yes, I've got nothing to be ashamed of, I've got nothing to hide, and that live their life authentically, then I just think that's a lovely kind of consequence of the book. And and as I said, it's one of my favourite letters. But I do feel that, you know, sometimes there are taboo subjects that people, particularly adults, get very uncomfortable about you. Well, I've had a lot of clapback from adults about some of my books. Never teenagers, never young adults, but adults. I even had one adult come up to me and say about Pick Up Boy and say, "Why do you feel it necessary to write about a boy facing his own mortality? No child wants to read about that." And I thought, well, what you mean is you don't want to read about that. But I thought that, so I answered him and said, you know, what I hope I'm doing is broaching a subject and providing strategies for children who might find themselves in a similar situation, or for their friends and so forth, just to talk about it and talk about these issues. But for some adults, they get very, very nervous about topics that, you know, some of the topics I cover. But then I think if I don't have some adult kind of feeling uncomfortable and having a go at me, I haven't done my job properly. So, you know, so it doesn't bother me. So I just think, yeah, I got that right then. Because I think, you know, there's a saying, and I can't remember who said it, but they said art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And I kind of think, yeah, I think, actually, yes, I agree. And I like reading books that challenge me and challenge my way of thinking and make me think, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way before. And I think there's something really to be said for that. And I think, you know, if the subject makes you uncomfortable, then I think it's worth exploring why it makes you so uncomfortable and kind of looking inwardly rather than outward to condemn. Look inward and think, why does that make me so uncomfortable? Some people are gay, get over it, live with it, you know. And you know, and in the same way that in Dante's in the, you know, the family's world, some of the friends don't talk about it, and some of them have got their own secrets, etc. But Adam, it's kind of how Adam was always open about what he was, but through the course of the book, through various events, he becomes more closed and withdrawn. And it's again thanks to Emma that he kind of comes out of that shell, and you know, so that she has an impact on all of their lives, and that's what I wanted to show.
Yeah, in fact, that scene is one of my favourite scenes. I think the most heart-wrenching scene, perhaps, maybe not the most, but one of the really difficult scenes to read was when, and going back to what you were saying earlier about public opinion and how people stereotype young fathers, was when Dante was in the shop and the customer spoke to him in such a judgmental way about poverty and claiming state benefits, for example. What did you want to highlight about class and prejudice in this scene?
Again, it was just trying to be truthful in that moment, and how some people would condemn him for being a young father and not knowing anything about him, and automatically assume that he's a as I said, he's a deadbeat, and he's worthless and reckless, and for heaven's sake, why didn't you just make sure that you took the appropriate measures to make sure you didn't get a girl pregnant and so forth. And it's that kind of attitude, and I just wanted to again be truthful in that moment, and how he has to then deal with that and realize that there are people who are always going to look at him as a young dad and assume they know all about his life and assume they know all about him. And even though their assumptions are wrong, he can't let that rule his life. He has to, and it is this thing of people make assumptions about you, but you have to decide whether or not you're going to take that on board. And again, it's one of those things you kind of have to learn that that's your opinion. I don't have to let that rule my life, basically. And that's what Dante has. He has to come to that realization that he has to make his life his own, and he has to make his own choices about things and so forth. And I hope that, you know, emotionally he's a different person at the beginning of the story to the end of the story. And I do love that emotional journey with my characters, where they start the story in one place and they end in a very different place. But they are sometimes they change for the better, and sometimes they don't, but they're not the same. So that for me is the really interesting thing of creating characters, is to watch their emotional journeys.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And you spoke earlier about Adams in terms of being really bold and proud about his sexuality. And this is an affront to his secret partner who struggles to accept his own sexuality. Can you speak a little bit about the complexity of homophobia and masculinity that's presented across the novel?
I think what it is Adam's partner is gay, but he doesn't want to admit it, or at least he doesn't want anyone to know about that. And he's still very much in the closet, and he's still very much, he hasn't come to terms with who he really is, his authentic self. So he wants to keep their relationship a secret. So when Adam does something, basically Adam kisses him in public, and then his partner goes nuts and beats him up. And again, it was again based on something I read. I mean, to be honest, that whole thing was something else that happened that I read about, where there was a man who was walking with his male partner, and I think it was in Trafalgar Square or something, somewhere around there in West End, and 3 teenage people came, one girl and 2 boys, were walking towards them and started a whole load of homophobic slurs and nasty calling out and so on. And one of the men turned around to confront them, and they beat him up. And 18 days later, he died in hospital. And I read that, and it was so appalling. And and again, that was a spark for, I want to write about this. I want to, I really want to kind of do this. But I wanted to do it in a different way, because what Adam is experiencing is not exactly the same. It's not homophobia. It's someone who can't accept who they are, and it's almost like a domestic violence incident. Well, in fact, it is a domestic violence incident where he gets so badly beaten up and ends up in hospital, etc. And I again wanted to explore this thing of his partner not being able to face who he truly is, and he's not ready to be. And what draws his partner to Adam is the fact that Adam is so open and honest about it, but he's not there yet. And the fact that then Adam kissed him in public meant that he lost it. And then Dante, of course, his thing is, right, he's gonna get this person who beat up his brother. But it means that then Adam becomes very withdrawn and into himself and never leaves the house, etc. And so it's Adam's journey through that, all of that, to come out the other side that I wanted to explore.
Yeah, you spoke earlier about Dante becoming a teenage father. He has to redesign his whole future in a lot of ways, but he's not shut off from accessing things like university. He got good grades, for example. So I just wanted to know, is there anything on the horizon for Dante in perhaps a sequel?
It's funny you should say that, because again, it's excuse me, it's something that I thought I would like to turn into a trilogy. And there would be a prequel, so we'd get Mel's side, and then there would be a sequel where Mel comes up, she comes back a few years later and wants her daughter back. And so it is something that, again, I would like to kind of sit down and explore. But I've got so many ideas for books in my head, and it's just so little time to get on with it. But yeah, it is definitely something I would like. Yeah. I don't feel their story is quite finished.
No.
And I do want to, and I think the thing is as well, I think there's so many fathers, not just teenage fathers, but dads who, and it's assumed that the mother's rights are sort of higher than the dad's rights, and I don't think that's fair. And it should be about who the child is best suited to be with. But I think Dante and Emma are establishing a relationship, and he dotes on her and loves her, and he would do anything for her. But the mum coming back and wanting her daughter back, I think, would be quite an interesting one to explore.
Oh, I wonder what he'll decide. That's very exciting. And just before we go on to the Q&A, how have you felt about the addition of Boys Don't Cry to Pearson EdExcel and Educas's English Literature GCSE specifications, and the comments that have come from students and teachers studying it?
Oh, it's been amazing. I'm so thrilled that it's actually on a couple of curriculums, and I think also the feedback has been so phenomenally positive, and I love that, and so I hope that when anyone reading it will enjoy reading it. And I remember when I was doing my own GCSE equivalent O levels and A levels and things, and some of the books we had to read were so dry, and it was kind of like, oh, and it's and books I had real trouble relating to. So I hope Boys Don't Cry. I apologise for anyone having to do homework on my book first. That's not why I wrote it, but I do hope that you enjoy reading it, and it feels kind of believable and relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to the questions. There's so many questions here.
Okay.
So thank you so much for what you shared so far. Someone's asked, how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, Boys Don't Cry took about a year, maybe 14 months, but about that time. But I kind of flew through it. But it's one of those things where I did my research. I absolutely knew what the story was, what I wanted to say. And so it's just sitting down and getting on with it. But it's one of those things, sometimes people are surprised by how long a book takes to write. And I remember when, sort of writing the Noughts and Crosses series, and I wrote Noughts and Crosses, and my sister read the first one, and then I wrote Knife Age, and the first one took me 18 months, and then the Knife Edge took me a year, and my sister read it in a day and said, "Where's the next one?" And I said, "You're going to have to wait another year to 18 months, dear." So it's one of these things where they take a while, and then of course you've got to go over them, and it's about making every sentence and every paragraph as good as you can possibly get it, and making sure there are no holes in the plot and so on. So it is an endeavour, but I love it. I wake up every morning thinking, I'm so lucky because I'm doing something I love, and I love creating stories, and it's my way of trying to connect and communicate with other people, I guess, and even people I don't know, which is amazing because I've had letters from around the world and messages and emails and things, and it's just so amazing to me that people have read my book and that they want to discuss it, and I love that, absolutely love that.
And someone's asked, who or what were your key writing influences? So more thinking about like who inspired you to become a writer.
Do you know, I think every good book that I have ever read has inspired me to be a writer. I think growing up, I loved most of the Narnia books, not all of them. I thought The Last Battle was pants, but I did love the Silver Chair, and and obviously Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe and The Magician's Nephew and so forth. And then sort of as a young adult, it was sort of classic books like Jane Eyre and Rebecca, but it was also the Agatha Christie books. I worked my way through all of those. The first one I read was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which was an Hercule Poirot story, and I was hooked. So I read everything she wrote, and some of the language in it at the time was very dodgy, but the woman could plot, so I loved those. And it's just every good book I read made me want to write my own, and every bad book I read made me think, I'm sure I could do better than that. So it was, and it's something from the time I was like 7, 8, I was always writing my own stories and poems, and I was lucky because I had really wonderful English teachers who would encourage me and not say don't waste school paper, but would actually encourage me in my writing. So I was very lucky that way. So I think, I kind of feel like I've always been writing, but it never occurred to me until my mid-20s that maybe I could be a published writer. So it was people like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. Alice Walker's book, The Colour Purple, was the first book I read that was written by a black person. And before that, I genuinely didn't think that black people wrote books because I hadn't come across any. And the only story I'd read that featured a black character was Othello, Shakespeare's Othello, when I was doing my A-levels at the time. And the first novel I read was when I was 21, and that was The Colour Purple. And then I found a black bookshop in London, and that's after paying my mortgage, that's where all my money went, food and then books. And I just devoured, Toni Morrison, Walter Mosley, all the books I could get. non-fiction and fiction, because none of that was taught in schools, and I feel that it's very hard to be it when you don't see it.
Yes.
And so I think it's so important that we have inclusive representation in the books we read and the films we watch and the music we listen to and so forth. And, and for example, at one point, I thought classical music was not for me. And then at my local library, they had albums that you could just take out. So I took out some Mozart and Beethoven. I thought, let me listen to this. And again, it was like, oh, this is beautiful. I love this. But again, it's not like someone sat me down and said, that's not for you. It's these things you take on. It's like I thought opera was for rich white people, basically, until we had an operetta company come into our school who did Hansel and Gretel. And we're all going, oh God, we've got to listen to opera. Are you kidding? And we all trooped in there, like we're all going, it was like sort of meeting our executioners. And we sat down thinking, this is going to be so boring. And you could have heard a pin drop as soon as the witch came out and she started singing, and it was amazing. And we were begging our teacher to bring them back and do more. And until that moment, I thought opera was not for me. And I think it's so important that children and young adults are exposed to such as diverse a canvas as when it comes to arts as possible. So important.
Absolutely. Okay, going to the actually, before we do that, what was the message that you wanted readers to take away from Boys Don't Cry?
I don't think there was a message as such. I don't tend to write books saying, and here is today's lesson. But what I hope they would get from it is kind of, it would open a debate and a discussion about what would you do in Dante's shoes, or what would you do in Adam's shoes. And I think, for me, the best books are not ones that preach at me, but the ones that make me think about walking in someone else's shoes for a while and living their life, and how would I cope, and what would I do, and what would I do that would be the same, and what would I do that would be different. And so I hope what it does is it opens up the topic for debate and discussion, and maybe engender some empathy, so that if you do know someone in that situation, people aren't as swift to judge, and just find out what their life story is, and and so forth, and find out, get to know someone before you start making assumptions about their lives. So I hope, but I don't ever sit down and think this is the message for today. No. First and foremost, I want my books to be entertaining.
Yes.
And then and open up, and I hope what it does is it makes the reader want to sit and discuss it with somebody, and discuss the themes and discuss the characters and so forth.
Powerful. Thinking about what you were saying earlier in terms of potential for sequel, prequel, why didn't Melanie ever call Dante back and find out how Emma was doing?
Well, she'd had 11 months and she wasn't coping. And I think also what it was she, again, it's something that will come out in a sequel, but her upbringing wasn't the best. And she came very close to hurting Emma. And that's when she knew she needed help. And her thing was, well, Dante's the dad, over to you, and she's out the door. And her horror at the fact that she almost hurt her own daughter, I think, was the thing that led her to kind of just go. And she has to basically find herself, and she has to kind of do her own growing up before she can cope with a child. Because when you have a newborn, they constant crying, they need attention, and it's very hard to cope with that if it's not something that you signed up for, if it's not something that you expect. And I think, from her point of view, she was too young. Dante's definitely too young, but it's a situation they find themselves in, so they have to deal with it. And again, that's what I wanted to present. But with Melanie, I just wanted it to be that she can't cope, so there's no point in her phoning or whatever. Of course, she's desperate to know how her child is faring, but from her point of view, her best bet is to just stay away.
Yeah.
And she stays away for a number of years until she can sort herself out, and then she wants her child back. But that's another story.
Another story for another day. Kimberly has asked, what would you say is one of the most impactful moments in the book, or something that is a meaningful or standout moment for you?
I think, as I said earlier, I think one of the ones is the dad covering Dante over and that whole parent thing. And I also think when Adam is beaten up and that, I mean, I was writing that and a chill went down my spine, and it was like, oh, you know, but it was kind of, I've got to write this. And but there have been moments in some of my books I thought, gosh, is this a bit hard hitting, and should I kind of maybe draw back from that? And I thought, don't you dare. And it's just write it and be truthful in the telling of it. But I think when Adam's being beaten up and then Dante is being held back and he's saying, stop, or you're gonna kill him, and it's sort of like, and then the person beating him up runs off, etc. But I think that for me was a part of the book that I was invested in the whole thing, but that was really kind of, wow, okay. Let's see what comments I get about that.
Yeah, and I think the fact that it's kind of based or inspired by a true life experience as well, I think that definitely adds.
Yeah, I remember the man's name, and I remember reading this and just thinking, oh, come on, really? Is the 21st century and we've still got to deal with this nonsense? Let people live, for God's sake.
Absolutely. Aunt Jackie is an important character.
Yes,
She also brings forth like a shift in the story, and she cares for everyone. Why did you present her? What was her role? You wanted to speak about.
Well, she's kind of no nonsense, and she's telling Tyler about himself, and you got to get it together as far as your sons are concerned, and so on. And also through her, it's revealed that Tyler's situation was not unsimilar to Dante's when his wife got pregnant, and they were quite young, and he had to give up on some of his dreams as well. And so that's why he's so furious with Dante for making what he felt were the same mistakes, and he felt he'd brought him up better than that. And so Aunt Jackie, though, is a kind of sort of, Tyler, you need to get it together. You need to have these conversations with your sons, especially at the time, Dante and so forth. But I think it was again about thinking that Jackie and Tyler were kind of bashing heads, Dante and Adam's dad were sort of butting against each other. But basically, there is a love there, and there is a kind of support there, and it's her way of, it's some people you find are quite abrasive, but that's just their nature. But they mean well, whereas some people will smile in your face and stab you in the back. So, so it's kind of like presenting these different types of characters, and then you make of them what you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone's asked, why did you choose the title Boys Don't Cry? What significance does it have in relation to the story and themes?
Because I think there's this ridiculous stereotype or trope of real men don't cry, and which is so much nonsense, and I think it does such harm. And this whole thing of boys being told, don't cry, boys don't cry, kind of thing. And I just wanted to kind of just say, well, actually they do. And if they want to cry, then let them cry. And if men want to cry, let them cry. And who's to say you're a man, so you shouldn't be doing that? Because men. Especially in Dante's case, he's going through anything that a teenage mum would go through, and he's going through all these emotions. So why can he not express himself? Why can he not say, I'm not coping, or I need help? And I think sometimes there's this thing of, well, boys aren't supposed to say that, or men aren't supposed to say, I am not coping, or I need help, and I just wanted to address that and say, this isn't. I don't think it's right. I don't think that's how we should be bringing up our boys.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a message we should be giving to men, that they have to hide how they truly feel, etc. And so I kind of, again, that's why I thought it would make an apt title for the book.
Absolutely. Irene from year 9 says, could there have been another ending to the novel? Did you ever imagine this?
I didn't, actually. It's an interesting question, but I didn't, because the way it ended, I thought Dante decides he's going to step up. He's not going to have his daughter adopted or fostered. He's going to step up and he's going to be a dad, even though it means now that all his plans at the beginning of the story have now been put on a back burner, or they're off the stove entirely. But he's now got a new role, and that's as Emma's dad, and that's what he's going to do. And so I wanted that to be the case, and I wanted Adam to kind of come back to who he was. I mean, it's going to be a slow process, but again, through Emma's help. And I think and I wanted it to be Emma having an influence on all of them, and changing their lives, but changing their lives for the better, because she's the conduit through which all of them begin to communicate with each other, and begin to connect again with each other, which kind of got lost when the mum died.
You speak about themes like masculinity and so on, and someone's asked if you met Dante and Adam in real life, and also thinking about like your character profiles and everything as they're navigating these issues, what would you say to them?
If I met them in real life and knew their stories and so forth, I think I'd just want to give them both a big hug first, and then just tell them, keep on, just don't give up, and keep on, and don't let other people define you. Basically, I mean, it's a message. It took me a long time to learn, and my message to anyone out there is be your authentic self, and don't let anyone else define you. And it's sort of like, I think one of the worst things I did when I first started out, and even as a teenager, was I was always trying to please everybody, and you end up pleasing no one, not even yourself. And I just kind of think, you just be true to yourself and live your own authentic life, and like Shakespeare said, to your own self be true. This above all, to your own self be true. And I think never a true word has been spoken or written. So I think that's what I would say to them, and just say, be your true selves. And if anyone has a problem with that, that's their problem, not yours. Don't make it yours.
Seth in year 9 wants to know a bit more about writer's craft here. He asks, what type of environment do you enjoy writing in? Do you have specific strategies or places that inspire you?
Okay. Well, I write in my attic, and the attic is kind of back-to-back bookcases, so I love writing with books around me. And basically my strategy is to apply my bum to the chair and not move until I've written. Sorry to be prosaic, but but when people say, "How do you write?" and all the rest of it, and I have these ideas and so on. Basically, you have to get on with it. You have to just sit down and get to work. And the thing is I try and write something every day, but it's about, even if you write, you might have to go back and change everything, but at least you've written.
Yes.
And it's about, trying to be disciplined about it. And what I try and do is plot out my books first. So I might do a chapter breakdown, or at least a kind of, what's happening with each of the characters, and then sit down and get on with it and write it. And as I said, it's not a fast process. Writing novels, I don't find a fast process. Some people can write them in a couple of months or whatever. If it's a novel for young adults, or an older novel or a longer novel, it tends to take me at least a year. But but as I said, what drives me is getting to know my characters and wanting to write about their lives and living life through them. And sometimes my characters take me in places I didn't expect, and I love that, because if I've done I do a mini biography for all my major characters, so I really get to know them before I start writing. So that if they then decide, if it seems like they're going somewhere where I hadn't expected, I go with it because I have to trust the character. And that's thrown up a lot of surprises in some of my other books where I thought, that's not what I plotted, but let's see where this goes. And sometimes it's actually worked. It's worked for the benefit of the book. It's made it a stronger story. So I do love. That's where the major work for me comes in, is making sure I know my characters first, so that my characters are different in all my books, and so that if the plot then goes somewhere else, I kind of think, okay, let's see where what that character is going to do with that.
And on that point, like, do you write one book at a time? You're talking about it taking a year.
Yeah.
Or do you kind of have 2 or 3?
No, one book at a time.
Okay.
Because otherwise there's a danger that the characters might start talking like other characters and so on. So it's one book at a time.
You. And someone's asked, what text would you pair along with Boys Don't Cry to engage with dialogue and emerging themes?
Well, that's an interesting question. Gosh. What book would I pair with it? Wow. Maybe a book from a teenage mum's point of view. Or I'm trying desperately to think of some titles, but bear with me. But I think maybe from a young mum's point of view, suddenly finding herself in that same situation, so that you could do a compare and contrast. Or maybe someone who is trying to find a way to come out to their parents as gay or something, or come out to their friends as gay. So that I'm sure there are a number of titles that could work with that. So I'm trying, as I said, to think of some off the top of my head, but I think they're definitely out there. But I think a compare and contrast with those themes would be really kind of interesting.
Yeah. And on that point, someone's asked about the structure of the novel, you using the dual narrative. Like, what caused you to choose that structure for this story?
I love multi-viewpoint stories. I must admit, I love getting more than one point of view on the same incident. And it's this thing of, we could all be in the same setting. For example, we could all be stuck in a room or a hall somewhere, and suddenly we open the doors and there's nothing else out there. Everything else has disappeared. We're in space. We can see the stars, but there's only this one room left. I think we're all in the same setting, but how each of us would cope with that is the interesting thing, because we're all different people. And so for me, it's definitely I tend to get my story plots first, but the hard work and the graft comes in creating those characters and getting to know them, so you know exactly how they would handle any situation. And I think that's so important.
Someone's asked about the setting, and someone said, which part of the UK is Boys Don't Cry set in? City or borough? I thought that was an interesting question.
I don't think I ever went that deep with it. It was just, for me, it was in London, and it was kind of like, southeast London or whatever. But the whole point of being not specifying is it could be anywhere, and that for me was it's in a city, but it doesn't matter which city, because it could be anywhere, it could be anyone, it could be any one of us. And for me that was the important thing. And as long as it was in that kind of city setting, I didn't feel I needed to be specific about exactly where it was. I think I get specific if it has an impact on the plot, and where they wasn't, because I wanted it to be, it could be any city, any teenage boy, and finding themselves in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And someone's asked, what was the significance of Dante getting rid of his Beyonce poster?
Well, I guess it's one of those moments where it's kind of, as the saying goes, where you as a man, you have to put away those childish things and embrace being a man and so forth. And his thing was, I've got a daughter now, and it's sort of like, time to grow up, time to, and that's not to say that he wouldn't like Beyonce or her music or whatever, but it was kind of like, okay, things need to change. And, and it was kind of just letting go of those what, as he saw them, childish things. So, and having to step up and be a real dad. So
it's interesting. It's one of the more like subtle ways of him kind of reaching that sense of maturity.
But I think you can reach maturity and still be young at heart. I think, and I remember. I used to be a computer programmer before I was an author, and I remember I was coming back from. We were on our way to a business meeting, me and my boss and another colleague, and I had my power suit on and all the rest of it. And I remember and those little thistles that you could get from I think they're from dandelions or whatever. When I was growing up, we were told they were fairies. So if you catch one, you can make a wish. So we were discussing, the programming and the software, blah, blah, blah. And I saw one of these in front of me. I went, oh, a fairy! And I ran and caught it and made a wish or whatever. And I turned around and my boss and my colleague were just staring at me like, what the hell? And he was like, oh God, And so my kind of the whole power thing or the power dressing and all the rest of it shot to hell. But I just thought, okay, I'm sorry, that's just me, and you can still be young at heart. It doesn't mean you have to let go of all the things you liked as a child. And I think as an adult, I think we become more inhibited. It's not so much that we, and why does maturity mean that you have to become more inhibited? And I remember I was lucky enough to go to Dallas once, and they had this sort of huge courtyard which had holes at regular intervals in the courtyard, and they had spurts of water coming up, and it was timed to classical music or whatever music, so you could see the shoots of water coming up in time to the music. And it was a baking hot day, and all the kids were running through it, having a whale of a time. And I thought, if only I were 10 years younger, I would have done exactly the same thing. And I really, really wanted to, because I was baking, and I just thought, oh, that looks so much fun. But I stood there, no, I've got to be an adult. And I just thought, you know what? Now I'm old enough. I think, I'm gonna go for it, and I just run through the water. But I just think sometimes we get so inhibited, and so, what are other people gonna think, and that we forget that go out there and just live your life. Live your best life. And my best life would have been running through those spouting fountains. But there you go.
Absolutely. Harmon has asked, if writing about such topics takes an emotional toll, how do you look after your own well-being when writing such emotional issues?
What a good question.
Powerful
question. Wow.
Powerful.
You know what? Sometimes you do get so embroiled in your characters and you're living through them that it's very hard to let it go. And I remember when I was writing Noughts and Crosses, and Callum, one of the main characters, something really bad happens to him at the end of the story. I don't want to say what, because, spoilers. But I was in tears when I was writing it, and for a while afterwards it did affect me, and I kept thinking, oh, you numpty, for God's sake, he's not real, and he's, but at the same time, he felt real to me, and all my characters feel real to me. So sometimes you have to make a conscious effort to say, okay, let it go, move on to the next thing. But I think actually, if you're really feeling as your characters feel, that's a good thing when you're writing it, right. But you need to be able to let it go when you've finished. And I think, some of my characters go through real traumas. So I think for my own mental health and well-being, I have to let it go. I have no choice, otherwise I'd never be able to write the next thing. And you have to kind of just think, take a deep breath and think, move on. And I think also when I was writing Noughts and Crosses in particular, there were a number of things that Callum goes through that I went through in real life. And I thought I had dealt with them. But what I'd done is I'd buried them. And so when I was writing the book, that's when I realised that actually I hadn't let these things go. I just buried them. And now I had to deal with them all over again. So I think it worked for the benefit of the book, but it brought up a lot of painful stuff. And then I had to kind of think, okay, you finished the book, now try and move on, you know. And things that happened to him, particularly in school, and you know, like the first time he travels first class because his friend got him a ticket to travel first class, and he's got this first class ticket, and the ticket inspector accuses him of stealing the ticket, and which happened to me when I was a teenager. The first time I travelled first class, and the ticket inspector said, "Where'd you get that ticket from? And how come you got that ticket?" And I got a whole interrogation because I was travelling in first class. Or I remember saying to my history teacher, "How come you never talk about black scientists and achievers and inventors?" And she said, "Because there aren't any." And I thought, well, I'm sure there must be, but you know, we'd never been taught any, and that's what I had to educate myself then. When I was in my 20s, when I found the Black Bookshop in London and just learnt about all these pioneers and achievers and inventors and so forth who were people of colour, but I was never taught that at school. Which is why when I was lucky enough to get to co-write one of the episodes of Doctor Who, I wrote about Rosa Parks. I did the Rosa Parks episode, and I was so thrilled because she's a hero of mine. But I didn't learn about her at school. I learned about her in my early 20s, and I just thought, that's crazy, you know, so...
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you've shared about your writing process, about the novel, and also about other texts like Noughts and Crosses and your experiences doing that. And thank you all for your engagement, and all of your questions are amazing. I'm so sorry we couldn't get through to all of them. There were just far too many. But thank you so, so much for your engagement. This live session has been recorded and teaching resources will be created for you. Please sign up to our e-newsletter so that you can find out when these resources are available to support you with your teaching and learning. Thank you so much, Malorie.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening.